Oh, you know, I've got a pocket knife.
And you've got four
I'll figure it
chickens?
out.
You got four chickens?
3 chickens.
You got three chickens?
Yeah,
You can do it. You can survive without humanity.
I'll be fine. I'll be fine.
Hi, Luke.
Hello. How's it going? Going?
That's the
Really?
question. That's the question.
Yeah, geez Louise.
And there you were. You were the man on the ground in Pennsylvania. How did you know?
I was, yeah. I mean, I feel like we've known for a while now that it was going to come down to Pennsylvania, or that Pennsylvania was the biggest swing state. Florida was on the table for a little while, I guess, too. But the real reason I was there is my partner's brother was working for the Biden campaign. So he kind of recruited a crew of us out to help out. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, that is serendipitous for us all, for sure. So let me officially get this going, and then we're gonna jump into that particular thing, because how great to have a narrative journalist to help us all process what's going on in this this moment of American history. So welcome you all to this is the final of Luke's third I think public event in his time as our documentarian in residence, and it's just been so great to have you over this period, Luke. It's been
really fun for me too.
Yeah, it's just been so great to have you, and all the things you've done for us. And as I've mentioned, this is all because of our great Mellon Fellowship and just the kind of work that we're trying to do in the narrative journalism program, and the ways in which we're trying to evolve this program. And so let's just jump right in. So I had talked to Luke about what we could talk about tonight, and I had just said, it would be cool if we could process this election, and that's when Luke offered to me what he just told you all, which is that he actually went out there to Pennsylvania for a few days. And so where were you in Pennsylvania? It's a big state and a very diverse state.
It's a really fascinating state, not one that I have spent time in. I've been to Philly a few times for like 1 or 2 days. I had been celebrating my brother's 21st birthday in Pittsburgh. And so I had spent very little time there, went to really the suburbs around Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, which is where we're still waiting for final results from. And yeah, I don't want to come in here as any sort of like more knowledgeable presence. I'm not, I'm engaged politically, and I find it interesting on multiple levels to kind of be present and focused in this moment, but I'm just as lost as you all are, and found I'm finding it difficult to even feel sort of focused and awake right now, with all the sort of just like uncertainty of it is wearing on me. And I really, if we dive into just election stuff, like I want to make it really about I don't know, maybe we can engage with it in a kind of a nonpartisan way, which was one of the big challenges of this week. I, just to kind of put the cards on the table, have 0, if maybe 1, Trump supporting people in my immediate community. I live in San Francisco. San Francisco voted 80 to 85% in favor of Trump, which is crazy. And
wait, you said San Francisco voted 85% in favor of Trump?
Sorry, 85% in favor of Biden. and then, when went to Pennsylvania, where Trump's presence is very alive, and 1 out of every 2 houses has a Trump sign out front. And I went and started knocking on doors, really trying to, more than anything, get people to vote. And I found myself for the first time in front of people who had these different views than me, and really struggled to find ways to talk. I think the way in which we are polarized has just like made the sort of like bipartisan basic conversations that I think we once could have really difficult. It's like I found that I was completely inexperienced in juggling these viewpoints in one conversation. So that was just one interesting takeaway. And I think the second thing is there is a wide spectrum of knowledge and facts out there. And it was shocking and at times sort of, at times I felt pushed, and at times I felt sort of saddened by different interpretations of the world and our current moment. People who saw very fundamental things from a completely different lens because of where they get their information. And some of it, really pushes what is the truth. So it's still factually correct, but presented in a way from just a totally different perspective. And that's interesting. That's like some of the best conversations I had were on those 2 sides of the aisle. And then some where, people were really misguided, where they've been getting their information from places that don't have, this type of integrity that you kind of hope. And it was really exciting to engage with that. I would highly recommend. So I went thinking it was going to be this sort of like volunteer, okay, put my head down, do the work. And I had a really, really stimulating and fun time. My group knocked maybe 3,000 doors over the course of 6 days. You talk to maybe 100 to 200 people a day, and these are people that you'd never otherwise interact with. And it's surprisingly similar to what I do for a living. So I think it kind of like.
Well, yeah, if I could step in here.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're doing, it's great. And before I ask this question, I want to remind anybody can like pop a question in down here, like anything you're thinking about, because we'd really like this to be interactive. So just write a question in the chat and we'll throw it in there. But it seems to me like you were kind of doing a partisan's job, but you're a narrative journalist at heart. And so that's what I'm really kind of like interested in, and like, even if they're basing their decisions on misinformation, and I know I have people on my Facebook feed that they're there because I covered them, like they were characters in the film that I made, because that's our goal is actually to like go into these communities and try and tell their stories. So there they are, they're in my circle. But they're posting stuff that's complete conspiracy theory, you know, Biden's a pedophile and but then there's a deeper level, like why are they susceptible to that, to this conspiracy? What's going on? So yeah, I'm wondering like, did anything happen to you? Like how do you tell this story?
I think that is been the existential question at the heart of journalism in this current moment, is how do you tell the story of what's going on without becoming a partisan voice? And I think it's become nearly impossible. And I think we live in a sort of like post-fact era where what is true does not apply across the board, and journalism's fight to hold on to that integrity has been really challenging. I think it's hard to talk just about journalism and not about social media and these sort of bubbles that we are all kind of burrowing ourselves into. I can speak for myself. I feel the kind of diversity of opinions within my community is just getting narrower and narrower and narrower, and we're each burrowing in different directions, and we're kind of, as a society, fractured. So I was kind of just asking myself, walking through this neighborhood of 150 houses, and the spectrum of beliefs about the world, the spectrum of values that you encounter house to house could not be wider. And it's like, how does this single community evolve in a way where one neighbor has zero in common with their next neighbor, and that person has zero in common with the following neighbor? And I think it has something to do with this way in which we're kind of communicating virtually, and how that creates these sort of thought bubbles that can grow. We are fed information that we like, and that snowballs.
Yeah. That's just interesting, though, that you were knocking on doors. Were there any actual conversations with people that stuck with you?
Yeah, there were. Hey Pam, would you mind if I asked you to mute yourself? I'm sorry to call you out, but I keep having your screen pop up.
I muted her.
Okay, sweet. Thanks, Pam. Or thanks. So we're talking a lot about how polarized we are, and there are still people out there who are undecided, which is also mind-boggling, but maybe in some ways closer to a world that embraces this spectrum of beliefs. People who truly were dedicated voters, were going to vote one party or the other, but couldn't quite decide, and saw valuable characteristics on both sides. And that was really interesting to engage with too. I think overall, through these conversations, and most of the work was quick, sort of, have you voted? If not, okay, here's your location to go vote, etc. But I felt a theme of most people wanting the best for themselves, and more often than not, the country as a whole. And really disagreeing on how to get there. And that was really disheartening to sort of see. It's like the sort of fundamental values here are not so distant, but the sort of choices and the menu that we've sort of been given has pulled us apart. Again, like, these are very off the street sort of takeaways, and I'm not a political reporter, but this is how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, well, so here's another question. Like, has it changed your sense of the role or significance of doing the work that you do, which is, in this environment where most people are really going to form their opinions from the bubble, the social media, or the news network they choose to follow? How important are these stories, like Midnight Family or American Factory, or those types of pieces?
What was the first film you mentioned before American Factory?
It was a film. This is a really great film called Midnight Family.
Oh.
Check it out. It's really good.
I mean, I think that sort of the sort of fundamental belief at the core of my work is in the value of connecting with people who you otherwise would not connect with. I get a high off of that, and it changes the way that I see the world. One project after the next bends my reality and opens my eyes. And I try to do that for the audience. I try to kind of have you all engage with a family in Mexico City who, you know, you otherwise would never meet and never understand. And I think that is you know, if I maybe said this in a previous workshop, but like if you were just to think about what our understanding of the world would be without storytelling, without music, without paintings, which I think are other forms of telling stories, without storytelling, like it would be a really, really dark place. And I think stories connect us, and they cross these boundaries that maybe politically or socially are much more difficult to cross. So I often get asked, you know, documentary filmmaking is often sort of placed in the same bucket with sort of social change. A lot of documentary films are expected to have a sort of social issue at the core of them with an impact campaign. And I am often asked how that sort of fits into my work. And sometimes the answer that I want to give, I don't always feel confident enough to do this, but the answer I want to give is like, I believe in the sort of social importance of storytelling for the sake of storytelling. And like a good film can end there and still have a really sort of active role in the world. And I think that's just an interesting thing to think about, of the sort of real importance of communication as something that we should be thinking deeply about and spending a lot of time on. I think a film is our most technologically advanced and intellectually advanced form of communicating. It's our best shot, in a way, of kind of getting other people to feel things that they might not otherwise feel, or think things that they might not otherwise think.
Or take them out of that either or, my side, your side.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting what you're saying, because it's sort of like almost a fine line. Like there are some like well-regarded documentaries that at the end they say, you know, if you want to get further involved, contact. Like how, it's interesting just to think about, you know, what is that line between like being just a pure storyteller, like meet these people, they're not like you, they're going through something different, just for the sake of that story, and going just that little bit further and advocating for the cause that they represent. How would that change the experience for you?
I think in a very practical way, the moment a film becomes sort of like a true social impact campaign, the amount of just information that you are burdened with as a storyteller really changes. I think your audience deserves a buffet of information as they sort of engage with the issue at hand. Whereas some of my favorite films thrive in sort of nuance and lack of clarity and the complexity of things. And that's not a great pitch if you're trying to get somebody to donate. You know, Midnight Family is all about ambiguity, and it leaves you kind of uncertain about a lot of things. And there's not sort of easy answers to that system's solution. We, at the same time, you know, have put a lot of thought into how the film can be used in tandem with organizations that are kind of already doing that work. And that feels sort of like a happy, we'll meet you halfway of kind of partnering with people who really do social change work full time, who are the experts at that, who can sort of use the power of storytelling. But it's project to project, you know, like, I don't know if you all have seen Crip Camp. I think that's a perfect example of a film that thrives as a story, but at the heart of it, its social issue is the perspective shift that it delivers. Its social issue is getting you to spend time with disabled people in a way that society doesn't allow. to really emotionally connect with a bunch of coming of age disabled teens who you get to love and care about in a way that you might not in your everyday life. Like that is the sort of golden ticket, is when the social issue is meshed into good storytelling itself, and when the kind of intentions of both are lined up.
Yeah. Liz is wondering if you may have already mentioned that you're not a political journalist or anything like that, but she's wondering if you ever encountered voter suppression or reported on it.
I didn't. I mean, other than the ways in which the system as a whole is set up, which makes it impossible for people to, often impossible for people to vote. I didn't encounter anything on the ground in a real way. Yeah, nothing that really kind of shocked me, to be honest. It was fairly cool.
It's kind of interesting that this is literally the first time that Pennsylvania has done has allowed early voting without a reason.
Yeah, and yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of, like in Pennsylvania, your ballot needs to go in a secrecy envelope, which then goes into a third envelope. And like, if you miss the middle envelope, your vote gets thrown out, sort of stuff. But yeah.
Yeah. So, just, I don't know if anybody else has any questions specifically about how you're dealing with the election, but, it is, to me, it's like, I guess I wanted like I wanted the American people to say, enough with, fake news, and I wanted some resounding thing, and it's just not there, and it's kind of discouraging. But on the other hand, to me, it affirms like what you're talking about. Like, what do you do in that situation? Is like, well, you tell stories. Like, I don't know what it's not a great option. Maybe it's not like the moral clarion bell that I wanted from the nation, but it's like, as a person, like, what do I do? It's like,
yeah,
it's something.
Yeah. Well, just out of curiosity, what's the sort of political makeup of Denison? Sort of, what's the sort of spectrum there in terms of where you all come from, and what,
Anybody
I don't
want to
know
speak
the
to
whole
that?
group, but in a sort of general way.
I don't want to speak for the student body.
It seems like there's a good amount of people that supported Biden, probably a majority, a good majority, like a strong majority.
Yeah.
But I do know there's I have to say there's at least like 100 plus people that probably voted for Trump.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know the numbers at all.
Right. That's a rough estimate out of a campus of like 12 or 1,300, I think, or is it?
Yeah,
more?
or even more, maybe 150 plus students that probably voted for him. But yeah, and then the demographics, I guess, there's a lot of people from the Northeast, but I think like there's a good amount of students from a bunch of different states, so it's pretty widespread.
Yeah, cool.
One of the interesting things that was noted locally, because if you're a Denison student and you vote locally in Ohio, your precinct C, and the voter turnout in precinct C was down by almost 60% this year. So I don't know if that means that fewer Denison students voted, fewer Denison students on campus, or more Denison students voted absentee in their states that they come from before going to Denison, because they weren't sure whether they were going to even be on campus. So I have nothing to, like, I don't know if any of you have anything to add to that.
Interesting.
I'm in that precinct, but I'm a local.
Okay.
Yeah,
because voter turnout has been way up.
Generally, yeah. So yeah, it's a pretty liberal campus overall, but we have our outliers. So, but we're in an area, Licking County, generally, I'm sure Licking County went about 2/3 red for Trump.
More than
More than 2/3.
But Granville did not.
but
So-
Granville did not. So
Yeah.
so all right. Well, let's move on. So I mean, we don't want to like drain all of our human batteries obsessing about
Yeah.
an election that. So the other thing we wanted to talk about, it is toward the end of the semester and we do have another life going on. So I wanted Luke to talk about, just the concept of it. Sooner or later, you have to finish a project. You may not be ready to finish a project. You may want to have more time or get more material, or you may think of all kinds of other reasons why you don't want to finish the project, but sooner or later you have to finish a project. And so that was definitely the topic that I thought it would be good to talk about today. And once again, as we talk about this, go ahead and throw your questions up there. If you may very well be in this position. And we thought we may talk about other of Luke's things that he's worked on, but we thought it would be fun to talk about Last Chance U.
Yeah.
So we mentioned in a previous outing that you had kind of worked yourself up the ranks at Last Chance U until season 4, where you got to. Did you direct, like, I think you said half the episodes?
Yeah. So it's the world of sort of series and TV can be a strange one in terms of how credits are handed out.
Okay.
And in sort of traditional TV, which I don't really feel Last Chance U is, but you'll have directors that sort of just come in for the production. So you'll have a director on set directing actors through production, and then they'll sometimes just hand that footage off to post-production, and there's a showrunner sort of overseeing everything, but there are dozens of people involved at different times. So sometimes, if you're watching The Wire, there's sometimes, I think, I'm pulling out a random example here, but a different director on different episodes with the same sort of executive producer who's the showrunner and sort of like the one overseeing all of it across the board. Last Chance U is a project around season 4. I was the lead director and producer on the full production of the series.
Oh.
So for 13 weeks, it was me and an 18-person crew kind of figuring out how to document this season. And that's really when I stepped out, is when the season ended, we wrapped production, and there was a team of another 18 people who cut the series. And there's this guy, Greg Whiteley, who is the kind of original creator of the show, who's kind of overseeing everything, but not always sort of on the ground. So it's a weird process, to be honest, and not one that I loved by any means, but was interesting to sort of learn how to work in that way. And I think I felt comfortable doing it because the crew on both ends, the production and post-production, were people that I knew really, really well. And the sort of vision for the show was really well established. This was the 4th season. So, I felt a little more comfortable being less engaged. I would give notes on all the episodes at various stages, but, I really wasn't intimately involved in how that show was cut.
So while you're accumulating material, you don't really have a concept of, well, there's the games, so they're providing a lot of structure, but do you have a sense of because there's usually a theme, like, whether the town's, tax money is being well used to bring in out-of-state students or something like that. Do you have how much input do you have over, like, we're going to develop that theme as something that's or are you just kind of like getting as much as you can and giving them a lot?
There's too much happening at any given moment to just film everything. And really the work of a director on a documentary is choosing what to film and how. That's what you have control over. You don't have control over what happens, but you have control over how you follow it. And, we come in to follow a football team that has, say, 120 players on it in a school of 600 students in a town of, you know, what's the population of Independence, Kansas? Let's say 20,000 people. And you need to take that as your sort of block of marble and chisel out a compelling story from it. And events will happen that will shift the direction of where things are going. But the first decision is, who are the, you know, 4 protagonists of this season? Who are the most compelling characters that we can really build trust with and follow? And so that's the first big job, is casting. And you're kind of have a rubric of sorts in your head. Okay, they need to be a variety of different things, kind of looking at their backstory, looking at their role on the team itself, looking at what else is going on in their life. Even simple things of like, okay, who are their roommates and what sort of spaces will they be in that will be filming them? So that's the first part. The second is like, okay, literally setting up each day. Okay, today we have these 90 million things that are happening. What are the 5 that we're gonna spend the day to document? Okay, you know, Chance is in English class. We've already filmed 3 scenes of him sort of working on this paper, and today he's gonna like present it to the class. So like definitely a crew needs to be with Chance during English class. Our QB pulled his hamstring on the game yesterday, so like we absolutely have to be with the trainer when he walks in to get the follow-up for that. So it's about building out sequences and really following, you know, the events of the season in a series of moments that build and build over the course of what is 8 hours. And it's not individual moments. Each moment sort of needs to dovetail with the next. And you're kind of thinking about how the full arc of somebody's story, you know, what are the building blocks that you need for that? It's like, okay, so he pulled a hamstring. We need him with a trainer. Why don't we also go talk to the QB of the other team wung well, that's a bad example. Let's say somebody got a concussion. You're going to meet them with the trainer, and then you might go find the person that gave him the concussion and hang out with them for an hour. And then you might go and hang out with the roommate of the person who got the concussion, who's going to tell you a story about how he was up all night screaming because he couldn't sleep. And you're just kind of thinking about what are all the different perspectives that will give this story the most depth and power and complexity that's possible. So long-winded answer, but that's the job.
Yeah. So you, it's pretty fascinating, but so you weren't really involved in finishing this up on deadline and making something out of, but you were involved in establishing the storylines by choosing which A, choosing the characters, and B, making sure you followed them up and got their full storylines.
Yeah, I think, not to be too sort of abstract here, but finishing is something that comes up minute to minute, of constantly knowing more is happening than you have the bandwidth to document, and needing to make really critical decisions about when you've got enough and when you move on to the next thing. You are not just a vacuum cleaner sort of sucking up everything. You're making important decisions hour by hour in terms of what you get. I kind of, analogy that I really like, and I apologize if I shared this already, is like filming a documentary it's kind of more like fishing, and that you're not worried about all the fish that you don't catch. You just need like enough for dinner. And the director's job is to really kind of get those resources together. And so, yeah, it is a sunny example to talk about finishing, because I really was relieved of that burden. And that show in so many ways is, and I'm kind of a firm believer that the real story is put together in the editing, and it just wasn't something that I was that involved in.
Yeah. 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 That's interesting. Yeah. I guess I didn't know that myself. Yeah. So I know that you had some problems though, didn't you? Because like this season, the prior three seasons had a pretty, they all had their interesting issues for sure and their unique elements with characters and so on. But they all pretty much had a team that was kind of winning and
Mhm.
the players had fair shots at getting scholarships.
Mhm.
But this season was as one of the episodes is called, turned into a shit show.
Yeah.
And
The
and
biggest fear is like a 5-5 season. It's like you can do something if they win every game, and if they kind of lose every game, it's dramatic. I guess to a point. The fear was like, okay, once they've lost game 6, it's like, why are people going to care? And and I didn't mean to cut off your question, but it's again like the job is, what do we need to make this journey interesting? Like, what are people going to care about 2/3 of the way through this if the team's already lost every single game? And that was the kind of task. It was really hard. Really.
yeah, I was going to say, am I wrong, or did you did you start doing less on the players and more on like the boosters in town and like, and of course the coach became kind of self-destructive, but there just seemed to be more different types of characters, and I think you mentioned at one time like the players weren't as interested in talking to you.
So it just thinking about the sort of access into the story, it's like everybody wants the cameras around and the doors are wide open when you're winning, and the moment you lose, the door slams in your face and nobody wants to talk to you. A player wants his story of winning the national championship on Netflix, but doesn't really want the story of losing every game blasted out to the world. So it was a challenging process of building the level of trust so that players could see the value in the story being told. And I there were moments where I was unsure of that too. It's like, okay, what are these kids going to get out of this? And I frankly still have doubts about that too. It's like, the more that show has kind of grown in popularity, the more challenging it's been to know how to carry that baggage of the people who are in it become kind of nationally known. There's a really, the Netflix series Cheer was produced by the same team. I wasn't involved in it, but there's been some really, really sad news out of that. That wasn't like totally because of a celebrity status that people in the series got, but it's definitely tied up into it. And it's a new sort of reality of documentaries having that power with these big platforms to really draw national attention. So again, part of my job as the director was to be really thoughtful about who we were including and why, and making sure that those people felt like they had good answers to those questions for themselves. There were stories that I decided to ignore entirely because I didn't feel like telling them was something we could do well enough, honestly. Not to be, yeah, there was a big sexual assault scandal with one player who was on the team. He had gotten kicked out of his university, and it was a really, really tough decision to either go, okay, do we double down on this and kind of make several episodes just about this kid, or do we give him space? He's already been slaughtered by national media, and he's also done something really horrible. So it was a tricky one, but those sorts of decisions of kind of where to turn your attention. I know we're drifting a little bit away from finishing, but
Yeah. We're gonna go with the flow. We're narrative journalists. Jen, what do you got? And then I have a couple questions in chat. But Jen,
Yeah.
Well, this is just going along with what you were talking about, but I was about to ask, like, what signs do you get that, like, someone is going to be a really important character in your stories, but also knowing, like, do you ever feel like sometimes you just have to drop a character even when they have this? You're already describing there's an interesting story that you decided to let go.
yeah.
But, like, how about characters, and how do they react to that too? Because this is like a national coverage type of thing. How do you deal with the sort of personal relationship part of it with the character?
Yeah, it's really, really difficult. I honestly, I don't know if you can kind of tell it and how I tell in terms of how I'm talking about this. Like I have a lot of like unresolved feelings about Last Chance U, like in terms of what my role was and just in terms of that type of filmmaking. And I'm really trying to do less of it. I'm trying to do more projects like Midnight Family that are much more long-term and intimate, and where I'm in control of every frame in that movie, versus bigger projects like Last Chance U that I think have value, I think are crossing boundaries, I think are showing, my subversive take on it is like, let's show football America some real shit. Let's talk about racism. Let's talk about poverty. Let's talk about toxic masculinity to the people who are most blind to it through football. Let's use sports to like talk about real social issues in kind of a sneaky way. So there are compelling reasons to do it, but there are challenges that come with a project that expensive, to be honest. There's 60 people working on that show. In terms of characters, how do you know if somebody's a good character to follow? It can, the first question is what do they want? Like a good character always really wants something. Watching really ambitious people struggle to get what they want is, for some reason, never gets old. And that's why sports stories are always so good and often easy to tell, because the stakes of what people want is so clear. They want to win. So that's kind of one element. I also, a question I kind of ask myself is, it's easy to gravitate towards like the sort of outgoing extroverts, the people who just like hand you their life on a silver platter. And you see that in a lot of documentaries of just like very outgoing, funny, charismatic people as being these sort of traditional great characters. But I think there's a lot that's missed by going that direction. And with a new project that I'm setting up now, I'm actually like starting to spend some time with people who are like not what you would describe as like typical movie stars, but I think there's something really interesting about them. And the element that's making it work is the level of openness. And so that's, in some ways, what I'm telling myself is the most important ingredient. It's like, if these people are really willing to share and really willing to sort of like open up their world on camera, it'll be interesting. It's like, I find it hard to believe that somebody's life, if properly told, is going to be boring. It's like, we all are going through stuff. But we'll see. It might be really boring because they're not like super loud and funny. With Last Chance U, it's all of the things I just talked about. So their sort of goals and the sort of like stakes of their story. Here's some examples of that. How much do they have to win and how much do they have to lose over the course of the football season? Is this somebody who is first generation college kid in their family? Both their parents are gone. They're, season one, our main character was basically an orphan. first generation college kid, and was one of the best players on the team and could barely read and write. And watching, he has everything to gain. Like he has, if he can just get his grades together, he has a Division I full college scholarship in front of him that, if sort of handled properly, could totally change the trajectory of his life and his whole family's future. And if he screws it up, he's going to be, working at a fast food restaurant, and those are the stakes. And that, it sounds kind of exaggerated and huge, but is a sort of story that it can be really engaging. Another character starting.
Interject. That's Ollie, right?
Yeah, that's Ollie.
But I think one of the most powerful moments emotionally in that whole season was actually when he got a good grade in English.
Because he made it. Because he achieved what was thought impossible. And the sort of ladder that he needed to climb through the season was so challenging, and he did it. And it's like amazing.
Yeah. But it was interesting just because it was a little like, it was kind of, yeah, he couldn't play football if he didn't get good grades. But at that point, he was getting sick of football. Like there was a question about whether his heart was even in football at that point.
Yeah. I think I'm taking a lot of like complicated twists and turns and boiling it down into these sort of templates that apply as sort of clarity barometers or sort of pinpoints, but a good story is obviously far more complex than just like, but it's Ollie who I'm talking about, and also sadly 100 other kids that we've met over making the show, kids who come from absolutely nothing, who are athletically amazing, but struggle to make it through the system that will let them take advantage of that talent.
So let me leave time to get these questions in, but good question, Jen, because it's the number one question, right? You got to have a good character before you have a story. Gail, why don't you go ahead and ask?
Just quickly on that, like some films rely so heavily on character, they're character forward stories, and some don't as much and rely on narrative or rely on world building or other sort of elements that a good story has. So it's one piece of the crazy puzzle.
Yeah, that's great. Gail, you want to ask your question?
Yeah. I was wondering, so I'm not a filmmaker, I'm a writer.
Cool.
So I'm asking this from like a writing standpoint and like the standpoint of like shaping the story into what you want it to be.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you've ever entered into production and been unhappy with like what you had, or like if you didn't have enough, or if there was like an avenue that you could have followed that you didn't. And if you did, if you've ever entered into the production stage with that kind of like deficit, how did you like make up for it, or how did you handle it?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you know what to focus on and what not to?
Yeah. Really good question. I try to avoid, one of the central questions on my mind when beginning a project is sort of like, how do I set up the production of this project so that big mistakes can happen and we can still sort of float through it. Big mistakes on my end or big changes on the end of the protagonist. So how do you follow a story where a huge unexpected event can happen and you've done your homework, and by homework I mean filmed the right types of things that make the story still possible. And that's kind of one end. The second end is there are certain types of stories where your sort of coverage is more important than others. Let's say you're following a story about the 2020 election. You have until election day to film your story. And if you didn't get it by then, you can't go back. the story's ticking clock, which will probably be like a really great narrative backbone for the edit, also gives you this specified window of time to get what you need. And so I would approach the sort of production side of a story like that with a really different and much more sort of open-ended approach. I would want to be thinking about coverage in a really sort of healthy way. Midnight Family, it's timeless in a way. Like, this family is working the ambulance every night. It's pretty much the same, down to the uniforms they're wearing, down to the light. And so I can go back and keep shooting really whenever. And we did that. We submitted a cut of Midnight Family to Sundance at the end of 2017 and got rejected. And really had to make this decision of like, do we stick with this cut, keep submitting elsewhere, and call the film quits? Like, we really thought it was done. Or do we go back and shoot more and see what happens? And we did, and shot about 85% of the film in these final 2 weeks of that last shoot. And that was really a case of not having the right material, not having the best material that we could have, and having a topic that enabled that type of sort of return. And that really gets down to finishing too, to kind of give this a full circle of like—
I'm so excited.
To sort of have that moment where we thought we were done, but enough doubt that a nudge back into the making reopened the whole film to then give us pretty hyper clarity that we were done the second time. So yeah, I think there is a different approach for different types of stories. And there are some stories where you really need to be paying so much attention to what you are filming because you will never have a second chance. And then there are some where you can be really risky and really experimental in how you're covering it because you can come back whenever you want.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good question, Gail. So Daisy, we talked about this in a small private group for the film festival winners, but Daisy has a question about internships. So maybe we should talk about that in the bigger group.
Yeah. I think when I was an undergrad in college, which was not that long ago, I graduated in 2015, I really had it drilled into my head my whole life that if you go into the arts, you will be struggling your entire life financially. And I can only sort of speak from my own perspective, but also the perspective, I guess, of the kind of hundreds of people that I've met along the way is like, there are big industries that cradle the arts. Some arts have bigger industries than others. Film is super, super commercial field. And there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that are working union, middle-class jobs on film sets to, you know, executives to sort of struggling experimental filmmakers. And, you know, the whole spectrum exists. You can have as corporate as a job as you want in the film industry and as kind of challenging and unpredictable as a job as you want in the film industry. But I was never exposed to that spectrum. I was never sort of exposed to the idea that you can kind of build a career for yourself in film that is sustainable. I think the challenge that I am trying to thread, and we've talked maybe in sort of a subtle way about this with Last Chance U versus Midnight Family, is how do you make a living while also doing the work that you want? So how do you kind of thread that needle of things that are creatively fulfilling and financially fulfilling? And that is more challenging, but is an exciting challenge too. Like it's part of what makes the work engaging for me, at least. in terms of, there's a long-winded way of saying there are internships out there, and some are harder to find than others. I think the documentary space is particularly tough because some of the best documentaries out there are being made by tiny crews. Last Chance U, for example, has an internship program. You can go to One Potato, it's either onepotatoproductions.com, and there's a place where you can apply for an internship on the various projects that they're working on. They do cheer, Last Chance U, they're coming out with a basketball Last Chance U. That's one example of many sort of larger, usually more commercially leaning production companies that instead of employing sort of 3 people, they have maybe 60 to 100 people. And there are ways to apply like you would for any sort of job. What I did, and what I would kind of encourage you all to do, is when you see a film that you like, try and find people that worked on it. And there is this handy thing called IMDb where you can see every single person that worked on it and Google them and find their emails and reach out, figure out how they got that job, figure out what they're working on next. And I think you'll find, especially in the documentary space, I think it's hard, hard to do that with, James Bond, but not with American Factory, for example. You can kind of figure out what's out there. I think it's an industry that really relies on who you know, and it's not sort of who you were born knowing, but who you get to know. It can be who you were born knowing, but I have sort of 0 people in my sort of high school and family community that make films. But when I went to college, I just really started befriending and getting to know all the filmmakers that I could, and little by little built this community that has supported and pushed and sort of mentored me along the way.
That's a perfect segue to the next question. Lula, could you ask your question?
My question was just, as a college student, as a full-time college student, how did you first get involved in documentary filmmaking? I know you sort of hinted on this with what you just said, but
yeah,
were there classes you took or things you did separately? How did you begin working on stuff like that?
And do your second part.
I can't read my second
Would you
part.
recommend anything to someone in college interested in alternative medias?
So my, when I got to college, I have been making films since I was really little, but there were periods in my life where I really stopped doing it. And high school was kind of one of those periods. I made less films, was doing other types of art. And thought I was gonna be kind of study product design and kind of went to college with that in my head. But then was really exposed to some cool people around me that were in the film department and just hanging out there more and more, and started to make short documentaries. I would take a weekend and go shoot something and cut it together and put it on Vimeo. And those first films, which were like 2 minutes long, 5 minutes long, sometimes started as like 15 minutes long and ended at 90 seconds long, were really how I learned all of the technical things that I sort of know today. I'm still learning technically, but there's sort of the learning curve is really steep. Like if you go make 3 films that are less than 5 minutes, like you will learn how to record sound, you will learn how to expose, you will learn how to use Premiere or some editing software. And those are just like the basic backbones to sort of any film. And I just learned those making my own things. At the same time, I was looking for internships and stuff. And the first internship I got was with a documentary production company in New York. I grew up just outside of New York City, and I was here, I was doing this awful internship at this high-end art gallery in Manhattan, which was like where where true meaning in art goes to die and never come back to life. And it ended, and I was like, okay, I need to like cleanse my soul with something heartier, and got in touch with these two documentary filmmakers, and they needed some help finishing this film. And so I would go into their office, and unpaid, which I think is bullshit, but anyway, unpaid, I would just transcribe footage for them. And that's what I did. I just did it 2 days a week for like a month. So not that long, but that was my first experience getting in the door with like real filmmakers. And it was just like inspiring to be in the same room where like a real movie was being made. I'd never been in that room before. And that kind of got the juices going. And then got another internship with some people who had graduated from the film program at Stanford. Again, unpaid, 1 day a week. I'd go in and like organize their equipment and set up projects in Premiere. And just, I remember I was like so excited when they paid for my lunch. They like would pay for the train and then would usually buy me like a pretty nice lunch. So that was just the beginnings of just like trying to get in the same room where real films were being made. And just those first two internships, like it was never the sort of thing where I was like doing it full time. Like I was a full-time student, or I had like another internship that was like paying the bills or just other stuff going on, but I kind of squeezed it into the cracks. I was like, okay, I have a month before school starts here. I'm going to do this 2 days a week. Okay, I have no classes on Friday. I'm going to drive into San Francisco and work with these guys. And at the beginning, I just found it really fun. It was like just like the best way to spend that day. And it just continued to grow and continued to grow.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't believe our time is up. It just goes by so fast, but that's also a really, really good way to end. I mean, it's just where it starts. I mean, you just lean into what opportunities are there, right? And you tell whatever story you can tell, even if it's a 90-second story or a 2-minute story.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, it's a good way to end. I don't like ending on the idea of like unpaid internships, because I think
that's not a good way to end.
Yeah, I think like you all can hope for more than that, and you can hope for a production assistant on a normal project will usually make like $200 a day, so like $20 an hour. It's not, you're not killing it, but you're making money, and that's like entry level work that you can get with no prior experience, and is usually sort of a stepping stone of getting into that room where real things are being made and meeting people that can kind of bring you along with them to bigger and better things. So yeah, it's a world out there. People do this stuff. It's not just magic. It's not just people blowing money. It's a real industry where jobs exist.
And real people telling stories that need to be told.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, Luke, I can't thank you enough. I think it was a great hour. Maybe we can all just clap for Luke, and we can at least see a lot of people are just little blocks with names, but oh, there we go. We're starting to see people. Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have to have you back when this film that you're doing, which again I think is such a, pastoral care is such a, I mean, I just think it's a great project to be doing at this time where there's, that kind of care is so needed, and it's just such a great story to tell. So
we'll see. Yeah, I'm full of doubt and uncertainty, and I'm like, I don't know if they're good characters. And it's like, it doesn't get any easier. Like, I feel just as, if anything, it gets harder in some ways, easier in other ways, but like each project is just like, you feel like you're just jumping off a cliff, and like you hope when you pull the parachute, something happens. So.
Do you know that Kurt Vonnegut quote? We must,
No.
we must continually be jumping off of cliffs and growing wings on the way down.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so great. That's so great. He has another quote that was just in sort of some material that I was editing. One of the chaplains that I'm following quotes him, and it's like, the purpose of human life is to love whoever is around to be loved. And that's sort of like the starting point for this new project. So
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you everybody for coming. And thank you so much, Luke.
yeah, thanks everyone. Take care.
Take care. Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Mhm.